do you remember 4 years ago when Sony and Funimation had to cancel/remove Interspecies Reviewers because it didn't fall into their company's standards? Well, the reason why I'm bringing this up and reminding everybody of this is because it is somewhat relevant to today's news I want to be talking about, and that is Concord, Sony's latest screw-up. It is bad. Like, it is next level bad. I don't think I have seen something as bad as this, at least when it comes to gaming, honestly, ever. I don't think I have ever seen something just as a catastrophe as this. And let's explain. So basically, Concord is this hero shooter that Sony made from the ground up with their first-party company, and they've been working on it for quite a while, aka 8 years. Now, I couldn't get an actual number of how much money was pumped into this project. I kept getting different numbers. People kept saying 200 million, people said 250 million, some said 300 million, so let's just go in the middle of the ballpark, let's say 250 million. But regardless, that is a lot of money, okay? That is an extreme amount of money to make a game, and the fact that just today, Sony has announced to fully shut the doors and close down Concord says enough about how much of a disaster the release of the game has been. It's in fact such a disaster that its current player base is only 109, and I want to make sure I spell this out for you guys. It is only that high right now is because of this announcement. Because of the announcement that the game is going to be shutting down for good this upcoming Friday. Before that announcement, if you look at 11 o'clock today, there was like only 20 to 30 people actually playing the said game. Going on to another site here, SteamDB, you kind of see a similar number as well, around 30-something players, actively 116 right now. It's pretty bad. That's really low, especially for a AAA game release by Sony's first-party company, and on top of that, it is a hero shooter. Now, I'll get into all the nuance and intricacies of this in just a second, but I do want to do a cross-comparison for a second. And I know they're two fundamentally different games, but it really just goes to show how bad this game is really doing right now. So, Coffin of Andy and Leyley. A game that, let's be honest, made waves on the internet last year. Everybody was talking about, memes have been everywhere. To this very day, I see people using either Leyley's picture, Andy's picture, different type of fiend versions of Andy and Leyley online. You see it everywhere. I especially see it on YouTube and see it on Twitter. You see these profile pictures. Now, I am looking at the player account right now, and it is a very similar state as Concord. But I want to spell something out to you. For one, let's be blunt, most people that are probably playing this game probably illegally got it. Like, they went to alternative means to download this. I know a lot of the player base did. It is an RPG Maker game. It's a pretty easy game to pirate. Let's be straight up, okay? But disregarding that in of itself, we also just got to look at the overall Steam chart. Even looking at its low numbers right here, we got to remember that this was like one person, an indie dev, that made this game, an RPG Maker, and it, you know, has this amount of numbers many months later. Like, we're talking 11 months later, we have this many people playing the said game. You factor in Concord, and we're even going here, only 11 days this game has been out, and it is down lower than the Coffin of Andy and Leyley. That is next level disaster. The fact that your game, that is a AAA game with a 200 million plus budget, 8 years of development, is doing worse than an indie game made in RPG Maker that has been out not just for like a few days, but almost a year at this point, says enough that your game is not doing good. It is not. But let's get into the point of how we got here. So let's start off to the beginning. So we need to look at the situation with Interspecies Reviewers, and why I even dare mention it at the beginning of this video. Interspecies Reviewers was something that made quite a wave in the anime community discussions about 4 years ago. At the time of around COVID time, a lot of people were discussing the series, and it was in an interesting time period to where anime was starting to become a little bit more popular, and it wasn't necessarily like overwhelmingly popular to where the entire anime community knows about it, but for those that were actively watching anime for a very long time, especially seasonal shows, definitely were aware aware of Interspecies Reviewers to some degree, especially those that were on the site MyAnimeList, because for a brief time, thanks to the content creator Nux, is what caused Interspecies Reviewers to really blow up, and everybody started to talk about it. It became the #1 on MyAnimeList for a long time, which brought in a lot of discussion, and even to this day, active discussion about the state of MyAnimeList and its top anime. Now, regardless if you love or hate Nux, it does not matter. The point is that history did happen to where it kind of changed the site of MyAnimeList forever, which was kind of a main central discussion point for a lot of anime fans to really look at, like, what anime they would want to watch next, and kind of rate what they feel about their current seasonal anime. And so when Nux started talking about it, it kind of blew up the discussion of the forums and how ratings are handled, all this type of stuff, but basically a lot of general, like, attention was brought to the show. And at that time, basically, Funimation licensed Interspecies Reviewers. They licensed the show, and they even licensed a simulcast dub for the series. So, while it was coming out, basically, it would get a dub alongside of the Japanese release. And we see this kind of format to this very day. Something of recent is obviously, like, Alya sometimes speaks in Russian. We got stuff like that. But basically, Funimation was dubbing alongside of the Japanese sub. So, obviously, right at the beginning, watching the trailer, watching the first episode, anyone obviously paying attention to the show knew what they were getting into. Obviously, they knew it was going to have a lot of fan service, a lot of crazy content, all this type of stuff. Everybody knew going into the show, it was going to be unhinged fan service. They knew, especially when the very premise of the show, and just to give a brief synopsis for those that are unaware of what Interspecies Reviewers is, it's literally about a bunch of guys going to different brothels and rating them, reviewing said brothels. And I'm not talking about regular ones, we're talking about Monster Girl brothels, okay? So, that is the literal summary of the show. So, anyone doing basic research, not even trying to read the series, just looking at the back of the cover, can know what the story is about. So, going into the story, everybody kind of knew what to expect, almost. So, when it came out, obviously, people were like, man, this is crazy. Like, this is a crazy series. It blew up. A lot of people were talking about it, because it was a while since we really just saw a fan service show as unhinged, so to speak, as Interspecies Reviewers, especially just a very unique premise, honestly. So, anyways, we fast forward a few weeks later after the first episode aired. Funimation made a very, like, low-level announcement. They didn't really want to mention it at first, but they were kind of pressured into it. They were pressured into basically saying, yeah, we removed the entire series from our site, you no longer could watch it, and we're no longer going to be dubbing the show. And from what at that time period, I never really got full confirmation of it. There was a lot of episodes of Interspecies Reviewers that was officially English dubbed that just never saw the light of day. And so if that really is the case and there is episodes out there, I do hope one day they are secretly released or leaked somehow. But for now, we're left up in the air. It's mysterious if we'll ever see something like that. But getting back into the main point, Funimation pretty much canceled/removed the show from their platform, and they pretty much dropped the license to it. So you fast forward a year later, and Right Stuff, which is now owned by Sony, which has been about a year and a half now since they've been owned by them, they picked up the license to Interspecies Reviewers and started to release the Blu-ray DVDs and all that, and there was no dub accompanying it, because obviously Funimation dropped the dub, but basically Right Stuff took it upon themselves to release it to everyone instead of Funimation doing the deed. So anyways, we look at the current situation. Sony has effectively bought Funimation, Crunchyroll, and Right Stuff, okay? They bought that, they own all three, and Funimation did this decision while they were owned by Sony at the time. And why this is relevant to the current landscape of Concord is because Sony has definitely been in the spotlight as of late, being very anti-consumer, but also being very, how can I say, brain dead, or kind of just lacking sense when it comes to what the actual player base or what the consumer wants from a product. It's very clear with what kind of disasters they've done this year. I mean, one that really just comes to mind is Helldivers. I am a massive fan of Helldivers 2, okay? I put over 100 hours into it, pretty much have every single achievement besides like one achievement, and I loved the game. I was touting its praises, playing it with all my friends, playing it for hours. It was fun. But then Sony did their whole disastrous thing with account linking. And I know this isn't completely relevant to what's currently going on with Concord, but I'm getting to that point. Basically, Sony has done a lot of disastrous decisions. Their CEOs, these head honchos of these different companies, all that they hire and stuff, it's just been doing bad things that's really just pushed away the player base and people that want to support these said companies. And seeing what they're now doing with Concord, it just once again reconfirms those opinions many people have had, not just about Sony, but about the current landscape of gaming and certain things that is about just entertainment in general. It's turning into a culture war. And we've seen signs of this in aka Interspecies Reviewers, since it was owned by Sony at the time. We've seen the slow signs of these companies pushing certain things, and it's becoming more and more apparent they're heavily trying to push it, but it's falling flat on its face. So now, with that being said, we can talk about Concord. So Concord here in general is a complete disaster, not just because of it pushing agenda or DEI or anything like that, but it's a complete mismanagement of the company and not understanding what its actual consumer base wants and trying to basically throw money away at this point. That's what they're pretty much doing. So let's explain. Sony invested in this hero shooter game genre that, let's be honest, it has quite dedicated niche fan groups. You have Overwatch for one, Valorant, and even Paladins. And I have played 2 out of those 3. The only one I haven't played is Valorant. And I will say that getting someone to shift from a game that is a very niche market, like, hero shooters, is pretty hard to do. Especially when there is a lot of people that are dedicated to a certain game. They probably put hundreds of hours into a set product. They don't want to shift to another game unless there is a good reason for it. So right off the, the cusp or the cliff of the, the game release, Concord, Sony was asking for $40, 40 big ones for their hero shooter. That did not really do anything unique or different. But even before release, the marketing was bad, the community management was bad, it was just all around pushing people away. Even if we disregard the price point, we gotta look at what people were saying. I mean, going into some of the stuff on Reddit, what people are saying, people absolutely were trashing the designs of the heroes of this game. People did not like the way the heroes looked. They thought they were goofy, they were not marketable, and I completely agree with that statement, because it's like, you look at characters like Tracer, Widowmaker, and all that from Overwatch, people are gonna buy skins, people are gonna want to play those characters, let's just be blunt. I mean, look at Rule 34. And that's another important one I'll talk about in a second. But basically, you factor in the situation with Concord, the character models alone was a lot of conversation around them. People did not like just the pushing of obviously certain agenda that was going on. I'm not going to focus too heavily into this part, but the point is people did not like the character designs. And obviously, getting people invested in a game, especially spending 40 big ones for a game, you need to have something that markets them to people that want to buy it. In this case, your characters need to look good. It needs to be worth buying or have a good story or something. And from my understanding, Concord has no single player, just straight up multiplayer hero shooter game. So it proves that, once again, if they would have had a story, it would have drawn more people to it as well. But they didn't even have that. So they didn't have interesting characters. They had bad character design that many of the community spouted and hated on. On top of that, they asked for 40 big ones for a game when you could play something like Valorant, Overwatch, and Paladins for free. And on top of that, you have Deadlock that's coming out by Steam, I think is also going to be a hero shooter very soon. So you have something like that. It's like Concord did not stand a chance. Even disregarding all the other problems I've listed out, it doesn't stand a chance in the market when it's asking for money when there's already free alternatives, and let's be honest, have better design decisions, even despite the constant failures and setbacks that Overwatch 2 has had. So it's pretty astounding to see why, Sony would even go through with this and put 8 years of development with a first-party company to work on something like this, when it's just like, it clearly was a trend chaser at the time, and that's all it was. It is just a complete lack of self-awareness and a waste of money in general. So I think it's pretty just astounding, and I hope that this really does have everyone that has worked on Concord to really just take a step back and think about their design decisions and what they're doing. Not just, let's say, on DEI, culture war, and stuff like that, but also what the community actually wants from it. And also, look at what is currently going on within the space of gaming itself and what people are actively saying. And as long as Sony continues to contribute to people that really don't exist in the market, they're going to have failures like this. And it speaks enough when the game has completely been shut down in under 2 weeks of its release. A AAA game at that, with 8 years of development. That is a massive blow to Sony. It is, at this point, they're basically going to just write it off as a tax write-off. But still, it's a bad look for them. It really is. I would not be surprised if the studio that works on it, or some case, either gets a complete management adjustment, shutdown, whatever, because of what just happened. But we shall see in the future. So yeah, just as a reminder, Sony has been constantly making mess-ups, not just in the gaming space, but also in the anime space. So yeah, just keep that in mind now when you see stuff like this, that, you know, it's only a matter of time until we see stuff like this cropping up in the anime field, which we kind of already have in recent times, where that whole culture war that's going on within gaming space is slowly seeping into the anime space as well. So we have that to look forward to probably this upcoming decade. But anyways, be safe, stay healthy, I love you guys, Chibi out.